What's going on, guys? Recently there was some leaked Diablo 4 gameplay footage, and this comes from the family and friends version of the game. Now, I've already recorded this entire video once and then found out I had some audio issues, so I'm here again, so I'm probably going to go through this much quicker this time, and hopefully it'll just be a shorter video for you guys to enjoy. I really wish I could share this footage with you guys, but it could get me in a lot of trouble, at least my YouTube channel anyways. So we're just going to talk about it, and I'll probably just play some B-roll over top of it while we talk. First, I want to start off by saying that this gameplay footage comes from a version of the game that is very clearly unfinished. And this version of the game is probably a very, very old version of the game, and that the version that they are currently working on is probably leaps and bounds way ahead of it. And so there's a very good chance that a lot of what we saw in this game has changed in some way or another. You know, with the recent GTA 6 leaks where everyone was getting mad about the state of the game because it's like pre-alpha and people have no idea how game development works, I thought that that was really important to mention before jumping in. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's get started. The person playing the game is playing a barbarian throughout the entire video. And during this gameplay, there was something we saw called weapon ranks. Now, if you're someone like me who's been following Diablo 4 news since day one and been following it very closely, then you'll already know that weapon ranks are nothing new. Now, this is something that the developers themselves haven't talked about, but they have been seen in gameplay footage reveals during quarterly updates. But for those of you who are unfamiliar, these weapon ranks are XP that you can get towards specific types of weapons. And when you gain levels with these or ranks with these weapons, you get benefits for using them. For instance, the two-handed sword makes it so the direct damage you deal, or a certain percentage of the direct damage you deal, is inflicted as bleeding over 5 seconds. And the percentage of this direct damage, I would assume, just goes up with the rank of your mastery with two-handed swords. Next, we saw a potion crafter, and this potion crafter allows you to craft potions. It allows you to upgrade your healing potions. It also allows you to craft things called elixirs. It looked like there were lots of different elixirs that did all sorts of things, but some of them did things like increased your elemental resistances for a certain period of time, as well as increased your XP gain. And I believe some of these buffs, they appeared to last for 30 minutes or so, and there were also some other items like crafting things like incense, and these things buffed you as well for a certain period of time. And so this type of design really makes me think more of MMOs than ARPGs, because there are lots of temporary buffs. Things you might want to log into the game so you can craft a bunch of materials so you can then use these consumables to make your character temporarily more powerful. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about consumable items like this and getting temporary 30-minute, 40-minute buffs and then farming materials so you can do it all the time. It seems a little tedious, maybe kind of annoying, and not really in the spirit of ARPGs, and it's definitely more into the realm of MMOs like Lost Ark and World of Warcraft, that kind of thing. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about it. I think it's something we'd have to get our hands on and really test and play, but it seems like a little tedious for my taste. Next up, we saw these things called lost caches. And lost caches are hidden across the world, and when you discover them, you gain a permanent stat boost that applies to all the characters or all your characters on that realm. This is another one of those things that on paper seems kind of cool, but in actuality and how it plays out, I think will be a lot different than what the developers are hoping here. So you have these lost caches that are scattered throughout the world, and players can just go to these and get, a stat boost, and they probably think like, oh, cool, the player can just be in this world or in this certain area of the world. They come across this lost cache, and now they have a permanent stat upgrade. Cool, yeah, cool. But in reality, this is going to play out to players going to third-party websites, finding all the locations of these lost caches, and then just methodically going to every single one and getting them every season to unlock for all their characters. Now, I could see it being kind of interesting if these spawns for these lost caches are static, and players can have some form of mastery over kind of like speed running their characters every season, where they're like, okay, I'm gonna hit this one, then this one, then this one, then this one. I guess that could be kind of interesting for the people who are really into speed running like that. But I really sort of think lost caches are just going to be another form of like tedious content and really not all that engaging. but I'd love to see or hear your guys' thoughts, so let me know in the comments what you think about them. I think the game could do without them though. Now let's actually talk about the world that we saw in the footage. Aside from the footage looking like it was filmed with an FM radio, you can still tell that the game is very gorgeous. That being said, the whole open world seems very empty, which is something that I've been worried about since they announced the fact that it was going to be an open world, and since they announced the fact that you were going to have a horse, or you were going to need a horse to traverse it because it was so large. I've been worried that there was going to be just this huge world with lots of nothing in it. And in this gameplay footage for like the first 20 minutes or so, it does appear to look that way. It looks like there aren't that many enemies. You're really just kind of running through open, empty world with 1 or 2, 3 enemies here and there. But I will say that as the gameplay footage went on and he went into, I guess, like harder territories, the density of enemies did pick up quite a bit. So it could have just been some of those areas. It could be that those areas are just unfinished and they won't look like that on launch as well. Okay, so let's talk about what the actual combat looked like. So the Barbarian had like 5 different skills. I think he had 2 different shouts. He had a Frenzy ability, which was his primary ability. And he had like a Sundering ability where, you know, it's the one Barbarian ability we've seen like in every single gameplay reveal where they just kick dirt up at the enemy. It's kind of like your AoE ability that costs Fury. And then they had an ultimate ability. And if you guys know me and you've seen my videos before, you know that I despise ultimate abilities. I think it's horrible game design, especially for ARPGs. I think it's lazy. I think it has lots of negative impacts on the game that far outweigh any positive that having an ultimate could possibly have in an ARPG, but they look like they are here to stay, and this is going to be probably a big section of the video that I talk about here because I just can't stand ultimates, and you can see in this gameplay footage why they are such a problem. So the person playing the game is running around using his Frenzy ability a lot, and using his Sundering ability, and using his shouts, and he's doing very little damage. There's a very high likelihood that the person playing the game doesn't know how to play the game very well at all, and he built his character terribly or something and just wasn't doing any real good damage. But there's one thing like the Barbarian running up and using his Frenzy ability, and the Frenzy ability having no splash damage. It looked just like watching somebody play Diablo 2. Where the melee character runs in and is smacking and hitting one enemy at a time, and then it's very slow and really boring. Obviously, you're meant to just build Fury with your primary attack, and then you use your AoE, which he did do. But my biggest problem is that whenever he came across a situation where it was like, oh, this might actually be a challenging fight for me, I'll just use my ultimate. And he would just hit that one button and the whole screen would die. It wasn't even close either. It wasn't like the ultimate ability was like 400 times stronger than any other ability that he was using up until that point. And this is one big reason why I hate them, because I think a lot of the gameplay will just revolve around you using your ultimate ability. And there's actually a point where the person in the video is playing or fighting a boss, and that's exactly what happens. He goes up to the boss. He uses his ultimate ability right away and does like a decent amount of damage. And then the ultimate ability goes on a 1-minute cooldown. And once that ability is on a cooldown, he's just trying to hit Frenzy and uses AoE ability and then Frenzy. But the problem is it's a boss fight. It's hard. So there are ads that are spawning. All this stuff is going on. And he ends up not being able to sit there and do damage because he's taking too much damage. So what does he do? He literally ran in circles for like 30 seconds, specifically waiting for his ultimate to come off cooldown. And this is the exact reason why ultimate abilities are horrible for ARPGs. They're just horrible for gameplay, because this is what players will end up doing. They will just run in circles, waiting for their ultimate ability to come off cooldown, use it to kill things, and then run in circles again, waiting for it to come off cooldown. Now, obviously, this character was somewhere around like level 32 or 33, which is around the midpoint of leveling. Your max level is going to be 50 in Diablo 4, and then Paragons will bring you to level 100. But so there's a very high likelihood that this type of gameplay won't exist in the end game. Once you have your hands on legendary items and a unique item, there's a very good chance that you could have lots of builds that won't even use an ultimate ability depending on what kind of legendary affixes you have and what unique item you end up using. That being said, I think there's an equally high chance that we end up with a Diablo 3 clone where almost every single build in the game revolves around some sort of high cooldown ability that you want to like lower your cooldown on, and then you stack CDR on all your gear, and it's very straightforward and boring. Now, I don't know, because obviously we have no idea how the end game's going to play, but this is something that I am very worried about. I think that ultimate abilities have a good chance of not necessarily ruining Diablo 4, but making it a far less superior experience than it could be. Next, I want to talk about some of the stats we saw on items. There was a stat that gave the player a % chance to execute injured non-elite enemies. It was like a calling strike, basically. That was my first time ever seeing that stat, and I thought it was pretty cool. Another stat was one that said 100% chance to dodge while evading. I think this is important to mention here because a lot of people that don't know anything about Diablo 4 have just this preconceived notion of, oh, Diablo 4 has attack and defense. That's all Diablo 4 has, attack and defense. And these are people that are just regurgitating what they've heard their favorite content creators say like 3 years ago, but they have actually no idea that the developers have changed a lot of that stuff. They've shared a lot of things with about Diablo 4 defenses and weapons and all that. And there's just going to be a lot more to player defense than I think people are aware of. And so I thought it was worth mentioning this because it's something that we have no idea about. Like, what is dodging in Diablo 4? Does that mean I can dodge only melee attacks? Can I dodge melee and ranged attacks? Does it work on spells? What is evading? Like, how high of a chance to evade can I get? If I can get if I can evade like 90% of the time, then I'm going to be dodging 100% of the time. What is evading exactly? If I had to guess, evading is probably going to be something you get through a skill, right? Like you use a skill and you can evade for 5 seconds or something. And while evading, you get a 100% chance to dodge through having an item equipped that allows you to do that. I have no idea, but that's just one layer of defense that exists throughout, aside from just the defense stat on items. There's obviously going to be lots of other things like life regen, life on hit, block, dodge, evade, all that sort of stuff. So there's going to be a lot more to defenses than players and people are expecting. So when this player ended up killing the boss that he was fighting, I was sort of half expecting there to be some loot pinata, just a bunch of items pouring out of this monster. But it was actually the complete opposite. He killed this boss and it only dropped one rare item. It wasn't even like it dropped 3 magic items and 1 rare item, or 4 rare items and 1 magic item. It dropped 1 rare item. And that was it. And I actually thought that was awesome. Obviously, this could just be some weird early tuning with the friends and family version, but I really like that kind of tuning. And that was something else I noticed throughout him just playing in general. When he was killing monsters in dungeons and throughout the world, I didn't actually see items dropping all that often, just in general. Now, I will say that this will probably change. This will be something that I would expect to probably see more items when Diablo 4 releases, but there could be a good chance that they like that. They like the rate at which items are currently dropping in that version, and they'll keep it for the release of D4. Okay, and on to some of the items that we saw that I thought were pretty interesting. They had a scroll of wayfinding, which returned you to the entrance of a dungeon, and scrolls of summoning that summon party members to your location. I thought those were pretty cool, and they had a bunch of other scrolls, but the player didn't really hover over them. But it seems like scrolls and consumables like this are going to be important in D4. The player also accessed the Stable Master, which I think I said before earlier in this video. The player was not able to unlock the Stable Master until they completed the campaign. I don't know if that's for this version of the game or if that will be in the finished version of D4. But yeah, they didn't have access to a horse yet. There's also a vendor called the Purveyor of Curiosities that lets you gamble using items called Murmuring Obols. And these Murmuring Obols can be found by completing events. And events are things like what you would expect in games like Lost Ark or whatever, where, you're just running throughout the world and then this random event pops up next to you. It's like, kill this dude in 5 seconds or whatever. And you kill that guy and then you just get these Murmuring Obols and you can use them to gamble for items. The gambling UI looked almost identical to Kadala's UI from Diablo 3, the Blood Shard vendor, gambling vendor or whatever. Now this could, I would assume that a lot of this is placeholder stuff, including like the UI and all this probably won't look the same. But yeah, it's basically the same thing. You just picked a one-handed weapon or whatever and you gambled for that. You picked a helmet, you gambled for that, and etc. It didn't seem too complicated. The blacksmith, there's a blacksmith that existed. They also hinted at a jeweler that existed as well. The blacksmith UI looked just like Diablo 3's blacksmith, where you could salvage like rare items, rare items, white items, magic items in your inventory with a click of a button, and all the recipe tabs and all that looked pretty much identical to Diablo 3. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing if crafting is something that you do more often in Diablo 4. But I wouldn't really expect it to be, because the developers have said numerous times that they want you killing monsters to get loot. So I would think that crafting is going to be more of a way for you to fill in the gaps occasionally, which is a little disappointing. I think that, I mean, obviously this is just me speculating. It could be that crafting is way more important, but I really do hope that crafting has a little bit more depth and excitement around it. You know, I think it's fun to give players agency over creating their own items. But yeah, I guess we'll have to wait and see, because this video didn't really show much of what crafting actually is in D4. And we got our first look at gems. So we saw a crude skull, a crude sapphire, and I think a crude topaz. The crude skull had some unique healing effects depending on which slot it was socketed into. The crude sapphire gave some minion damage weapons, barrier potency and armor, and cold resistance and jewelry. And the topaz, I think, did some similar things. But so it looks like it's going to be a very similar approach to the way gems work in Diablo 2. And much like Diablo 3, there will also be crafting recipes, and you find these crafting recipes, I guess, throughout the world, on the ground, or wherever, and then you go to the respective NPC, like the blacksmith or the jeweler, and you learn the recipe from them. And lastly, we did get a brief look at the barbarian skill tree, but the skill tree for the barbarian was very small, and it looked very unfinished. I think this like friends and gameplay version of the game didn't seem like it let players get that far. I don't even know if it let them get to max level, because the skill tree didn't go down very far. You only got to pick a few things. The person playing the game only had like 5 skills, like I said. So I really think that this version of the game was very unfinished. It really only let players do so much. I don't really know what kind of feedback they were looking for in this friends and family version of the game. If it was really just like, is the gameplay fun? Because to me, it appeared to be like, just in general, very unfinished. So even the class, like I said, like the whole talent tree or the skill tree for the barbarian looked very unfinished. Now, I could be wrong. This could be the skill tree that we could expect to see on release for the barbarian, but I highly doubt it, and I really hope not. But yeah, it didn't look very good. But yeah, guys, let me know in the comments what you guys think about all the stuff we talked about here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.